Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 1979 thriller, The China Syndrome. Now, this is a film that I definitely agree with Roger Ebert in his opinion about this one. He says it's a terrific thriller, and he's dead on. He is spot on with that opinion in regards to this movie. This is one of those old school, slow burn thrillers that is spectacular and is a prime example of the best that that particular genre can offer. It's a slow burn thriller, but that doesn't make it boring. That doesn't make it any less exciting. That doesn't make it any less interesting or compelling. Um, this is a film that was relevant back in 1979 with its discussion of nuclear energy and the risks associated with it, and it is every bit as relevant now for the exact same reasons. Uh, Especially since this kind of predicted events that would actually occur in American history soon after this film was released in theaters. I think it was like 12 days or just a couple weeks after this movie premiered in theaters, the 3 Mile Island incident occurred. So, yeah, it's one of those things where this is honestly a film that was released at a point in history in America where it really hit a nerve. And when you and I think that of course after other nuclear tragedies like Chernobyl or Fukushima, this is a film that still has a lot of resonance today, for the same reasons that it did back in 1979. And it's one of those movies that, despite the fact that it is an older film, it doesn't feel too dated because of how relevant its themes are. So it's directed by James Bridges, who actually wrote the book that this is loosely based on, because this screenplay was a combination of two different scripts. One was an adaptation of the China Syndrome, and another one was some other separate project that Jane Fonda was involved with that was dealing with the controversies and the dangers of nuclear energy. And Michael Douglas, who was a producer at the time, because he was having a really hard time breaking out into Hollywood from television. Because back when Michael Douglas did the show Streets of San Francisco, it was one of those time periods where it was not easy for a TV actor to break into Hollywood and to be a star in Hollywood, just as much as they are in television. So he made his mark as a producer. In fact, he produced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And so after he produced that and got Oscar buzz and won Oscars and was, really popular for that, he became a really sought after producer in Hollywood. And so he had his own production company. And he came across the China Syndrome, thought it had potential. Originally, he was going to have Richard Dreyfuss be the co-star alongside Jack Lemmon, because Jack Lemmon signed on to the project before it was even finished with the screenplay, before the script was even done, before everything was in line. Jack Lemmon signed on because Jack Lemmon was a huge supporter of the anti-nuclear energy effort, and he really thought that nuclear energy was something that was really dangerous and risky, and really potentially bad for the environment. So it was something that he really wanted to be a part of no matter what. So that's why he signed on early before everything was even fleshed out. And there were some rewrites that were done, and then eventually, because Michael Douglas was having a hard time getting a studio to agree to fund the film because of its controversial nature, ultimately decided to combine the two scripts with Jane Fonda's story alongside the other script that Michael Douglas was currently working on. So then the Richard Dreyfuss character was taken out, and I think also another reason why is Richard Dreyfuss didn't agree to do it. So then things had to be retooled and rearranged, and they changed Richard Dreyfuss's character to a female reporter, so Jane Fonda could come in, and the rest is history. Now, James Bridges had to be begged multiple times by Michael Douglas and the studio to agree to do this movie, and he finally agreed to do the film under, a series of circumstances. And I'm glad he did, because his direction in this is great. This is some really fantastic direction. I think he does a wonderful job with the California setting, and does a good job working with the location shots. This wasn't actually shot at an actual nuclear power plant. It was shot at different other sort of energy plants, and matte paintings were used to create the illusion that this was shot at a real power plant. And I thought James Bridges also really did a fine job working with his actors and getting the most out of them. And he also wrote the script as well. He had a hand in the screenplay. I mean, it's written by Mike Gray, T.S. Cook, and James Bridges. So he also lent his writing talents to the screenplay for this film. Michael Douglas was initially kind of in trouble with the studio. Like, the studio almost wasn't going to have him in the movie if he didn't shave his beard. But he was like, I'm producing the film. I'm a big reason why this is even happening. I'm keeping the beard, because he felt that it was a better extension of his character. And he was right, because he's the opposite. He's the antithesis of Jane Fonda's character in this film. So you have Jane Fonda, Jack Lemmon, Michael Douglas. You also have Wilford Brimley in his acting debut in a pretty sizable supporting role. Apparently he was cast in the film because one of the producers, I don't know if it was Michael Douglas or not, but I know it was someone who was heavily involved with the production of the movie. They saw something about Wilford Brimley that they thought was going to be perfect for this character, and specifically for the last scene of the film. They saw his ability to have this, I don't know if reserved is the right word, but the kind of smoldering intensity that they felt that this character needed for the final sequence. You also have James Hampton, Peter Donat. James Karen is also in this from Poltergeist. He plays Jane Fonda's boss in the film. So yeah, there's a lot of really talented actors and actresses in this cast. It's a great cast. The trio of Jack Lemmon, Jane Fonda, and Michael Douglas is really strong, and really forms a very strong foundation for the film and for the overall story. I would say Jane Fonda's performance as Kimberly Wells is probably the best one that I've seen from her. For me personally, she did a wonderful job playing the role that the news wanted her to play. This kind of dumb, kind of ditzy news reporter. But at the same time, she did a really wonderful job playing the strong, independent news reporter who wanted to do some real news. Michael Douglas does a wonderful job playing the renegade photographer, the cameraman, who's a little volatile. He's rough around the edges. And Jack Lemmon was just amazing as his particular character, Jack Goddell. And Michael Douglas, he played Richard Adams. Wilford Brimley is Ted Spindler. Like, you could see why Wilford would go on to be a pretty sought after character actor for a good chunk of his career after this, because he just added a certain something. He added a particular ingredient to every film he was in that just really made it just a little bit more delectable. And yeah, it's also a film where there really is not a score. There is no score. In fact, there was a score. I'm trying to remember who it was that composed it, but there was a score for this film. But in test screenings with the cast and the crew and the producers and everything, they realized that it just didn't really have the same impact. The score just felt like it just really was holding the film back. So they took the score out, and instead the score is the different sound effects that you hear in the control room and outside of it. So the score of the film is really just the chaos, the anticipation, the potential of a disaster. That's what the score is in this movie, and it's honestly a really inspired choice. Normally, I'm one of those people that's like, hey, you really need a score, but in this instance, the film didn't need it. It wasn't necessary. So I think the choice to have the film be scoreless was actually something that helped the film stand out in a way that made it rise above a lot of other movies in the same category or a lot of other thrillers at the time. It also features some wonderful cinematography by James Crabb, excellent editing by David Rawlins. The film was 122 minutes, but it doesn't really feel like it's that long because you get engaged with the characters. All of them are likable. All of them have their own different personalities. All of them have the right amount of realism as well, and relatability. And then you have this whole, the thing with the stakes. The stakes are high, and it also does a really great job establishing the villains, the corporate behemoths. The giants that are behind all of this, that are just toying with us for money and for power, and they don't really care about the risks or the danger. That doesn't matter to them. And I know some people pointed that out, that that's a little bit ham-fisted, but let's be honest, folks. Like, that's not that far-fetched. That's not that far out of the realm of reality to have these corporate types that are just wanting things to be covered up. They are not really that enthusiastic or willing to admit that they've been letting the reactors be, let's just say, neglected for years because it's cheaper and it's something that doesn't really affect their bottom line too much. So yeah, there's definitely a conspiracy aspect going on in this film. There's a cover-up. And also what I find really unique about the film is that it's a film about a nuclear accident, but it doesn't actually happen. There's no nuclear meltdown at the end of the movie. It's just one of those instances where it was incredibly close to a meltdown, and we were lucky that that didn't happen. The disaster in the film is more to do with the knowledge that this could happen, and it did happen, and that we're lucky that the whole reactor didn't melt down, or there wasn't an explosion. And also the knowledge that someone did know about it. In fact, a lot of people knew about it, but they kept it under wraps for ulterior motives. And the climax of the film is really one of those climaxes that I think is one for the ages, because you have this whole situation, the scenario where Jack Lemmon, his character, he realizes the gravity of this, and he realizes that, he was right when he felt a vibration. He was right that, there was something wrong, and nobody's wanting to do anything about it. The higher ups just are ignoring the problem. And so he decides to take it upon himself and takes the whole control room hostage, because he does not want the reactor to be turned back on, because he knows exactly what's going to happen. And so because the corporate bigwigs, they don't want to, be involved in too much of a controversy. They also don't want to be outed for their involvement with potential catastrophe. So they try to do whatever they can to get him out of there, and in the process, they cause a scram, which is a terminology for I think it's like some sort of a situation in a reactor where things are going haywire, and that's the very thing that is going to cause a potential meltdown. So you have that drama going on. You have the drama going on with Jack Lemmon's character and his fate and everything, and it's just a really uh, thrilling climax because you have all these different elements that combine together really well, and it's very suspenseful, and you also have Jane Fonda's character who's in the middle of it because she's asked to interview Goodell. So yeah, it's one of those movies where it definitely is a slow burn that leads to a explosion at the end. Not necessarily an explosion of the reactor, but an explosion of ideologies and an explosion when it comes to the denouement, the overall ending of the movie. There's just a lot of extreme emotions, a lot of extreme sequences that occur in the film's climax. Uh, and the film also has some moments of levity, some moments where, it's having the characters have some witty banter back and forth with one another. I also want to give huge props to the production and art designers who created a full size recreation of the control room at the reactor that is based on a real control room in I think it's in Washington, the Hanford nuclear power plants in Washington. And so yeah, it's one of those films that it lives up to the hype. It's one of those movies that is critically acclaimed, and to me personally deserves every bit of the critical acclaim. It's a movie that I would definitely say it's one of my favorite films from the 70s. I definitely want to get my hands on the Blu-ray. Although this DVD is not bad, it actually does have a good amount of features. The two documentaries have a lot of interviews with cast and crew and are fairly extensive for the time period. It also has some deleted scenes. I don't know why the theatrical trailer wasn't put on here, though. The theatrical trailer I always thought was really strong because it does a great job hooking you and grabbing your interest and intrigue with the whole, like, soon you will know what China syndrome is, because it's a terminology that's used by people who work at nuclear power plants or nuclear physicists for what might happen if there's a meltdown and the core melts down into the earth. That's what the China syndrome is. And it's called the China syndrome because they're theorized that it could melt down to China. It's one of those things it's scary. And it's still scary. Like, this is still something that, to me personally, is, yes, very beneficial to society, potentially. And, it's a new form of energy, and there's a lot of positives that go along with nuclear energy, but there's a lot of risks, and risks that are really devastating for us and for the environment. So it's one of those things where, whatever side that you're on when it comes to nuclear energy, you gotta admit the risk is high because you're relying upon human error or human judgment to make sure things are all working properly and are maintained the way that they should be. You have all the other ulterior motives that are going on with nuclear power because you have the people who want the power, and not just the power that powers our TVs or our computers or our internet or any of these other things or our phones, the power over us that they get through money. And so you have these individuals who they don't really have our best interests at heart, so they're more willing to cut corners and do things on the cheap or not maintain things, and that's what leads to disasters that are catastrophic. And and affect our environment in a negative way permanently. Say what you want about coal and all these other forms of energy that have their own problems. Coal and its pollution is something that is, and coal and carbon energy, those are things that are, the pollution is still great, but it's over a extended period of time. It's not the extent of a nuclear explosion where the devastation to our environment, to the atmosphere, and to all these other things, it's way worse than any of the other forms of energy that we have. And so it is one of those things where it's like putting a nuclear bomb in our vicinity. It's literally purposely building nuclear bombs and letting them sit there, and it's just something that, yeah, it's definitely scary and it's intimidating. And I've always been kind of on the fence about nuclear energy. I've never been like totally against it because I see the benefits, but I also see the risks, and they're so immense that it's almost as if I'd rather we just find some other form of energy, like another clean form of energy that has less risks attached to it, solar energy, whatever it is, that isn't really going to affect our environment as negatively or as permanently as nuclear energy does if something goes awry. So I would say this is the best film that I've seen that really talks about that whole theme and that whole risk that's involved with nuclear energy. Um, I wouldn't say it's the best thing that I've seen that talks about that, because there's another more recent creation that I would say is the best that I've seen that really gets that point across. But this is the best feature film that I've seen that has done that. So yeah, if the film sounds interesting to you, I definitely would recommend checking it out. Especially for the cast. I mean, this is one of some of the best performances for Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon, especially. And from a technical standpoint, it's terrific. And I don't really know what else to say about the movie, except if I were rated out of 5 stars. I really don't find anything wrong with the China Syndrome. I think for what it is, it excels. It's an excellent thriller. It's an excellent film. It's a spectacular, slow burn that really does leave a definitive and a definite impact. And I guess if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give the film 5 out of 5 stars. Easily one of my favorites of this particular genre, and highly recommend it. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of the China Syndrome, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.